Alright, I tipped the engine up after dripping the oil out into the drain pan. I tipped the engine up on the clutch side, about a 45-degree angle or so. And I let it drip onto a paper towel just to get all the extra oil out that I can. Be fairly dry in there. And you'll hear some background noise. That's my kids playing. That's them on the monitor. They play some silly games, so they'll be screaming. They're playing with little Mario characters. So it's not actually the kids screaming, it's the Mario characters. If you got kids, you understand. So it's relatively dry inside there now. Here's what dripped out over the last 20 minutes or so. Took a little break. So now I got a magnetic pan and a paper towel for all the gear shift stuff. So there's a plate right here on the end of the shift ring that you're going to have to remove now. If you're splitting the cases, this has got to come off now. So there's that piece. There's the end of the turret. And there's going to be some little springs with little steel bullet-shaped things on the end of them. There's also going to be two little steel wedge-shaped pieces that kind of act as a shift stopper. Well, not kind of act, they do act as your shift stopper. So get all that stuff out of there. In the middle, there's going to be a 12mm stud. Probably going to have to use a thin wool. And probably going to have to use some air. That little sucker can be in there pretty tight. If you don't get it out now, you won't get it out later because there's no way to hold the shift drum. It's got to come out now. Once you get the shift forks out of there, the shift drum's just going to be spinning around and there's really no way to grab it. Has a little bit of Loctite on it. There's going to be a little roller on a spring arm. All that stuff has to come out now. Now the clutch arm came right out. It must have just been binding on the clutch rod, which should be right there, which doesn't want to come out yet. It might come out the other end. There's the clutch arm and the little fitting that goes on the end of the frame. If your motor's really greasy, now's probably the time to degrease it. You know, at least take a putty knife, get the big chunks off. Make double sure that you've got all the case bolts out of there. And if you got globs of old chain grease on your engine, it's going to be difficult to see them, which, you know, it's worth taking a minute to clean the big stuff off. Excuse me. Something about WD-40 and engine oil just makes my nose run. And this is my crankcase splitting tool. Got this on eBay for like 60 bucks, and heck, this thing's held up for a long time. You obviously want to back the threaded bolt, the pusher part out to where the arms are touching the case, and this has room to spare. Just want to make sure the puller arms are flat up against the engine case. Thread them in there a good 3/4 of an inch or so. Not much choice on this engine, but put the bolts in where they fit. Not much option. You'd like to have them triangular, but it really shouldn't split that hard. It shouldn't matter. If it doesn't split easy, I will stop and reconfigure what I need to. So you'd be better off to have those in a triangular pattern, but the way these bolts are, it just isn't going to happen. Make sure you got slack on the stud, and just kind of center that over the center of the crankshaft. I don't even snug those nuts up anymore because just pushing against the crankshaft will snug them up. That'll take the slack out. Need spare power for this, a 17 millimeter. Pop. There's the magic pop. You get a good feel for that. If something starts going hard, I'll stop. Make sure I don't have another bolt that I missed, whatever. Be prepared for another dribble of oil, about a ½ ounce or so. Looks like it's actually splitting pretty even. Now you can actually pry all you want as long as something's moving. If you're on a bind and you go there with pry bars and start prying around, then you could certainly damage something. And you can see how that's got some play in it now. I generally use the case splitter on everything. It just works so good. Even if there's good pry points, it's just simply faster and easier to do the tool if you've got it. And if you don't have it, I'd buy it. I don't know, maybe if you're just doing this one time, you might just be able to pry your cases apart without buggering up the surfaces, but I think it's worth the 60 bucks. And the couple minutes it takes to slap it on there, it's just nothing. Okay, now I'm going to lay this over on the clutch side. The left case is going to lift right off. Well, it should. Now immediately check for shims, and there's a shim. It goes right there. If you don't immediately check for shims, they could fall out as you're dripping the oil out, and you're not going to really know where they go. To whereas if you look right away, you'll see it's still laying over the bearing that it came from. So always take a minute to check for shims when you pull that first side off. I've got some old cardboard on the floor and an oil drain pan. Man, that old... I gotta blow my nose. That old engine oil really makes me run. Stuff really makes the nose drip. So next, everything should be fairly loose in there. There's one of the axles for one of the shift forks. And there's the other one. Those should pull out of there without having to use any tools. Shift fork, shift drum, and the last shift fork. Now, with the two transmission shafts being nearly horizontal, but not quite, I keep them tipped up a little bit so they don't slide out of there and start falling apart. I'm going to try to bring them out together. Oh! Well, all you can do is try. Now I'm going to stop and look for shims where I just pulled the first transmission shaft out. I see none. And there was a shim behind this one. I'm going to pay attention to which way that was sitting in there. And there was a collar that fell out. You know, just be ready for this stuff to fall out. Just be prepared that it is going to fall out, and then when it does, it's not that big of a deal. You know what? We got another shim there. It actually goes on first. And then the collar. And the gear. And this is the outer shim. You just want to be ready for those things to fall out of there in case they do. That wasn't a big deal. It's when a whole bunch of gears fall off into a pile that it's more of a big deal. That was not bad at all. Boy, the inside of that engine really stinks. Boy, whew. Making my eyes water. Now on a Honda, the crankshaft should just push out of there. Maybe a little tap with a hammer. On a Kawasaki, it's press fit. I'm not sure about Suzuki and Yamaha. They're generally, I think, they just lay in there. On the Kawasaki's, you can use the case splitter, mount it up there again, and use it to push on this. Or if you have one that doesn't want to come out, you can always use it on other models. Excuse me. There's the collar, crankshaft collar that goes underneath the primary gear. And I'm going to get a little bit bigger of a hammer. That's the smallest. There's a medium-sized one. That crankshaft should come out of there pretty easy. There's one bearing that fell out, no big deal. And the other bearing. That's about the tightest Honda I ever did see. They generally just push out of there with your thumb. Yeah, it looks like the bearing's coming. That's why it's coming out hard. And I guess we can get the biggest hammer. Should come out of there without pushing it. But it doesn't want to. That's actually the first Honda I believe I've ever seen that wouldn't. Well, it's not worth getting mad about. And the reason I didn't oil the threads on this one is because I oil them all the time. They're pretty much dripping oil. The threads on the puller shaft. I do oil them even though I didn't do it that time. I'll probably do it this time. I keep them pretty wet. Use this thing quite a bit.